At the beginning of the 14th century, in the steppes between the Volga and the Danube, a man appeared whose name would be borne by peoples, cities, and an entire Khanate. He was not the first in his lineage, and perhaps was not even supposed to become Khan, but it was he who transformed the Golden Horde from a military machine into a governed empire with ambitions. He was called an apostate, an enlightener, a usurper, and a reformer. We know him by the name of Uzbek Khan. In today's episode, you'll find out who he was and why his era changed the map of Eurasia. You're on the Amazing History channel. Here, history isn't divided into black and white, but comes alive through people, decisions, and unexpected twists. Today's episode isn't about battles, but about power, how it's taken, maintained, and turned into ideology. Uzbek Khan, a figure people talk about a lot but rarely understand. Let's figure out how he became not just a Khan, but the architect of a new order. Let's go. Let's go. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, Eurasia was divided among his descendants. The lands from Iran to the Carpathians went to his eldest son Juchi. And after Juchi's death, his son Batu inherited them. It was Batu who founded the state that Europeans would later call the Golden Horde. A nomadic empire with a settled economy, free trade, and strict military discipline. The capital officially became Sarai Batu in the Lower Volga. But no capital could guarantee stability in a state where power relied on the authority of the clan, the loyalty of commanders, and the ability to negotiate with shamans and emissaries. Immediately after Bati, the Golden Horde entered a long, tense period of interregnum, palace intrigues, and short reigns, where each Khan ruled not thanks to circumstances, but in spite of them. By the beginning of the 14th century, Khan Takhta was on the throne. He was not the strongest ruler, but a shrewd politician. His reign coincided with a severe drought, famine, and a prolonged crisis. After his death, another power struggle began in the Horde, in which they initially wanted to put his son on the throne, but not everyone agreed with this. The pro-Muslim faction, which had been gaining strength since the time of Berke, came into play. It was led by the experienced and charismatic Emir Kutluk Timur, who held the position of charisma, a man with a real army, money, and the support of the merchant emirs. They placed their bet on a young prince named Uzbek, the grandson of Mengu Timur and a descendant of Berke. Uzbek was not a simple heir to the throne and remained in the shadows for a long time. But this was exactly what made him valuable to the group of emirs and influential military leaders who sought to change the balance of power within the Horde. Uzbek was a Muslim even before ascending the throne, and this set him apart from previous rulers who leaned towards shamanists. He was ideally suited for the role of a ruler capable of turning Islam from a private faith into the foundation of state ideology. Kutluk Timur understood that if they wanted to strengthen the influence of the Muslim elites, they needed their own Khan. Uzbek became such a candidate. But, as in any major power struggle, there were those who were categorically opposed. At the Kurultai, the assembly of the nobility, intrigue flared up. Supporters of the old tradition, the shamans, the shamanic aristocracy, the Tengrians, and the heirs of Takhta tried to preserve power within the familiar order. There were rumors that they planned to eliminate Uzbek right during the ceremony. However, he managed to avoid the trap. Someone close to him revealed the conspiracy. Then a swift and harsh offensive began. Takhta's son, the main contender for the throne, was killed. The remaining rivals, princes, brothers, cousins, and distant relatives, were arrested, and then Uzbek made a fateful decision. Without waiting for them to scatter and start a rebellion, he ordered all of them to be executed. According to various sources, between 20 and 120 members of the Yoki dynasty were killed, almost the entire older generation. So, sometime at the end of 1312, Uzbek became Khan. He was about 30 years old. He already practiced Islam, had a clear mind, and political acumen. But most importantly, he had a team, Kutluk Timur, military leaders, emirs, merchants, clergy, everyone who wanted change. Uzbek didn't just take the throne, he became the embodiment of a new reality where the Khan was not just a military leader, but the head of a centralized, ideologically structured state. After becoming Khan, Uzbek found himself in a difficult position. His power was based on a fragile balance between the nomadic tribes, influential emir clans, and the tribal aristocracy, some of whom still adhered to shamanism or Tengrism. Uzbek was a Muslim, but he was in no hurry to implement reforms. According to Persian and Arab sources, he practiced Islam even before coming to power. Perhaps under the influence of spiritual teachers or under the patronage of Kutluk Timur, his practice of Islam was a personal matter. He performed prayers, fasted, but did not make religion a matter of the state. Priests, shamans, and Buddhist lamas still lived in the steppe. And most of the nobility, deep down, believed that the Khan's faith should not interfere with the old order. Only around 1320 or 1321, almost a decade after ascending the throne, did Uzbek take a decisive step. He officially declared Islam the state religion of the Golden Horde. This was not just a religious act, it was a political choice. He understood that in order to centralize and build power and create internal support, the Horde needed a unified ideological framework. And Islam, with its developed law, tax system, and international connections, was a perfect fit. Uzbek began with symbolic steps, building mosques, holding public Friday prayers, and inviting preachers from Egypt and Bukhara. But soon, symbolic actions were followed by harsher measures: the killing of shamans, the banning of Tengrism cults, and the persecution of Buddhist communities. However, it's important to understand that unlike many Islamic rulers of that time, Uzbek did not carry out a total purge. He left room for Christians, especially the Orthodox, and maintained ties with Catholics. This was not religious tolerance out of kindness. This was the diplomacy of a strong leader who knew the value of alliances and could calculate the benefits in people, faith, and taxes. Ruling the Golden Horde is not the same as ruling a city. It's like trying to control a herd that's pulling in 10 different directions at once. Before Uzbek, the Uluses, the territorial divisions of the Golden Horde, were governed by members of the Yochi dynasty, meaning direct descendants of Genghis Khan. They were a kind of semi-independent vassals. They paid taxes, provided troops, but mostly acted as independent rulers. This system worked well in the first decades of the Horde, but over time it gave rise to pockets of instability, since each of these princes considered himself a potential Khan. Uzbek Khan abolished this system. He transferred power over the Uluses not to his relatives, but to representatives of influential steppe clans who were personally loyal to him. These new rulers received the title of emirs, not by blood but by appointment. They depended on the Khan and lost their position if they lost his trust. To strengthen control, Uzbek introduced another innovation. In each ulus, 4 Karachi beks, military and administrative chiefs, were appointed, who supervised tribal unions and ensured military mobilization. This is how, according to some versions, the famous list of 92 Uzbek clans appeared. A new political framework of the Horde, built not on blood ties, but on loyalty and structure. This is not just a list of tribes, it's a new political system of the Horde, where each clan had its own place in the management structure, its own duties, and sphere of influence. The clan system is turning into a system of administrative loyalty. It was a bloodless but fundamental revolution. Uzbek didn't destroy the Horde, he redesigned it like an engineer. Where power used to come from clan status, now it flowed vertically from the Khan down, through emirs, Karachi, beks, viziers, and the Divan. The system was more like an early bureaucratic state than a traditional nomadic confederation. For the first time in the history of the Golden Horde, a real vertical power structure appeared, based not on personal charisma, but on organization. This was the talent of Uzbek Khan, not just to rule, but to change the rules of the game. While Europe was recovering from feudal strife and China was entering another cycle of dynasties, a city was flourishing in the lower Volga that was destined to become one of the richest and most populous centers of the 14th century. Its name was Sarai. It became the capital of the Golden Horde during the reign of Batu, but it was Uzbek Khan who turned it into the economic heart of the empire. Sarai Batu soon proved to be too remote and vulnerable, so Uzbek moved the capital to Sarai Berka. Sarai Vostok is located closer to the main trade routes. It was not just a nomadic camp with yurts, as people in Europe imagined. Ibn Battuta, who visited here in 1333, described wide streets, palaces, markets, mosques, water supply, and sewage systems. Mongols, Rus, Circassians, Alans, Greeks, and Arabs lived and traded here. The city was multilingual, multinational, and wealthy. Only a stable economy could support such a place. Uzbek Khan understood that the power of the Horde was no longer just in its cavalry, but also in money, roads, and the trust of merchants. He ensured the safety of caravan routes, established relations with trading partners from Egypt to China, and made agreements with the Genoese and Venetians, allowing them to restore warehouses and fortifications in Kaffa, Chersonesus, and Kerch. Caravans moved from Central Asia through Khwarezm to the Volga, to the Black Sea, and westward to Constantinople, Venice, and even to the Baltic. They didn't just travel, they were protected, and as one chronicler writes, they could move without military escort from Crimea to Khwarezm because no one dared to attack under the rule of Uzbek. In the Horde, a tax system began to form similar to those in Islamic states, with taxation of trade, land use, caravans, and even crafts. These taxes did not stifle but nourished the economy, allowing for the construction of cities, mosques, schools, and caravanserais. At the same time, Uzbek Khan did not completely reject the nomadic culture. He used it as a mobile military resource, but under his rule, the economy became decidedly urban and settled. During this time, Urgench, Old Crimea, Azov, Samarkand, and Signak flourished. In Crimea, the Uzbek mosque, built in 1314, still stands. It is one of the rare material traces of that era. Это был расцвет без иллюзий. Alongside trade agreements, Uzbek continued to punish rebellious territories and harshly suppress the opposition. But where there was harmony and order, goods flowed, silver circulated, and cities grew. We have already seen how Uzbek Khan built a new administrative system and created a functioning economy. But any state, no matter how strong it is internally, cannot exist without a well-thought-out foreign policy. In the case of the Golden Horde, that meant dealing with Rus, a fragmented but territorially rich land with growing ambitions. At the time of Uzbek succession in 1312, the lands of Ruses were in a familiar situation, fragmented, hostile to each other, but dependent on the Horde. Each prince traveled to Sarai for a Khan's charter to rule as Grand Prince. Each collected tribute, some willingly, others reluctantly. But it was Uzbek Khan who started playing the long game, using the internal quarrels of the princes in the interests of the Horde and of those who were personally useful to him. And at the center of this political arrangement was Moscow. Uzbek Khan understood that absolute control over Rus was impossible. It was too far away, there were too many princes, and their ambitions were too deeply rooted. But control over a key principality capable of collecting tribute from the others was quite realistic. That principality became Moscow. Prince Yuri Danilovich, the son of the founder of the Moscow branch of the Rurik dynasty, realized in time how the new model of power worked. He did not resist the Horde, did not rebel, did not plot. On the contrary, he sought an alliance and found it. Sources claim that Uzbek gave him his own sister Konchaka in marriage, who became known as Agafia in Orthodoxy. This was not just a gesture of trust, but a dynastic alliance, extremely rare in Mongol politics. Yuri became the Khan's son-in-law, and that means he was a person who could be trusted with much more than the others. The gamble worked, Moscow gained privileges, and Yuri received the Grand Princely Charter. But the most serious consequence was the rise of Moscow's influence not only as a political center, but also as a financial and spiritual one. The princes of Moscow gained the right to collect tribute from all of northeastern Rus and deliver it to the Horde. This allowed them not only to become wealthier, but also to buy the loyalty of the Horde with regular and punctual payments. Yuri Danilovich enjoyed favor in Sarai, but in the politics of the Horde, nothing was permanent, especially trust. Yuri's main opponent remained Dmitry Mikhailovich of Tver, nicknamed the Menacing Eyes. After the death of his father Mikhail, the previous prince of Tver, who was executed in the Horde on Yuri's denunciation, Dmitry harbored not just resentment, but a vow of vengeance. He understood that it was impossible to defeat Yuri and Ruses. Тот пользовался поддержкой хана. Yuri collected tribute and had troops, so Dmitry decided to act where Yuri felt safe, in Uzbek's very headquarters. In 1325, both princes ended up in Sarai again. Officially, it was to resolve the dispute over the right to the grand princely throne. But in reality, it was a hidden duel involving intrigue, bribery, and personal vendettas. In front of all the nobility and the entire court, Dmitry of Tver kills Yuri Danilovich right in the Khan's headquarters. Whether it was done in anger or was premeditated, no one knows. It was an unbelievably audacious crime, the murder of a man under the Khan's protection and right in the Khan's presence. Uzbek's reaction was harsh, but not immediate. Dmitry was arrested, but executed only a year later, in 1326. This delayed sentence speaks of a complicated game. Uzbek understood that Dmitry acted out of revenge, not political calculation. Nevertheless, a murder at court is a blow to the very authority of the Khan. That is why punishment followed, even if not immediately. The death of Yuri became a turning point. From that moment, his brother Ivan Kalita began to act not as a prince, but as the heir to a political mission whose goal was not just to survive, but to bring Rus under Moscow's rule, using the Khan's support as a weapon. Ivan Kalita was not just a loyal vassal, he was a new type of pragmatist, a man who understood that the Horde provided not only charters and gold, but also a model of power that could be transferred to his own land. One of his first serious steps was moving the metropolitan seat to Moscow. Before that, the spiritual center of Rus was in Vladimir. In 1325, Metropolitan Pyotr, at Ivan's invitation, moved his residence to Moscow, and it was from this moment that the transformation of the city into the religious capital of Rus began. This gave Moscow a tremendous advantage. Now the Prince of Moscow could speak not only with the authority of power, but also of faith. But Ivan did not limit himself to spiritual influence alone. He began to systematically eliminate his rivals, and he did this with the help of the Horde. At that time, Tver was Moscow's main rival, an old center with deep traditions and its own claims to the Grand Princely title. Its princes were more noble, wealthier, and held significant positions at the Horde's court. That's why Ivan Kalita went all in. In 1339, he personally went to the Horde and filed a report against Prince Alexander Mikhailovich of Tver, accusing him of treason and disobedience. Khan Uzbek, who would not tolerate even a hint of rebellion, ordered Alexander and his son Fyodor to be executed. The execution was public and demonstrative. It was not only a personal victory for Kalita, it was a political signal. Moscow is now the main ally of the Horde, and it gains the right to decide the fate of other principalities. In the same year, Kalita organizes a campaign against Smolensk, also with the support of the Horde. And from the defeated Tver, Moscow's warriors take the bell from the Cathedral of the Savior. This symbolic gesture meant that Tver was no longer the center, and from now on, Moscow dictated the religious and political agenda. The Grand Duchy of Moscow under Ivan Kalita became a mirror of the Horde system. Ivan began to build his own vertical power structure modeled after the Khan's. He attracted noble boyars, formed a managerial corps, and built a financial apparatus. Uzbek's reforms, with their strict centralization and vertical power structure, became a direct prototype for the Moscow model of authority, which would eventually grow into the Russian state. However, Uzbek's influence was not limited to Rus. His diplomacy spanned almost all of Eurasia. He acted not as a steppe warrior, but as a modernizing politician at the center of the empire, maneuvering between alliances, trade, and war. In the east, one of the key rivals of the Horde was the Egyptian Sultanate. Uzbek Khan maintained close relations with the Mamluks, the Islamic state that controlled Egypt, Palestine, and the Hejaz. The correspondence between Uzbek and Sultan al-Nasir was not merely formal. They exchanged embassies, arranged dynastic marriages, discussed pilgrimage, and the status of Muslims in the Horde. Uzbek even gave one of his princesses in marriage to the Egyptian Sultan, which at that time was a rare act of international Islamic solidarity. Although this marriage quickly fell apart, the very fact shows Uzbek's desire to integrate the Golden Horde into the wider Islamic world. On the southern borders, the Golden Horde bordered the territory of what is now the South Caucasus, which in the 14th century was called Eastern Georgia. These lands were under the control of the Ilkhanids, descendants of Hulagu Khan, who ruled in Iran and Persia. Uzbek Khan repeatedly launched military expeditions into this region, seeking to strengthen his influence in the Transcaucasus and challenge the Ilkhan's control over key trade and strategic points. A particularly important area of rivalry was Shirvan, a key point on the Caspian coast. Although the Horde's troops at times reached the Caucasus Mountains in eastern Georgia, the Horde was unable to establish stable and lasting control over the region. These campaigns, however, clearly show that for Uzbek, the Caucasus was not just a frontier, but a stage for geopolitical struggle between two branches of the Mongol world, the Golden Horde and the Ilkhanate. One of the most important areas of Uzbek's policy was the Black Sea coast, especially Crimea. Here he allowed the Genoese and Venetians to restore and strengthen their trading posts, especially in Kaffa, Kerch, and Chersonesus. These agreements were not a gesture of weakness, but a calculated move. In exchange for European goods and silver, the Horde received income and influence. The Catholic Church also did not stand aside. Pope Benedict X thanked Uzbek for protecting the missions and the freedom of Catholics in the Horde. This shows that Uzbek's religious tolerance was a tool of foreign policy. He knew how to sell stability and security for modern diplomatic recognition and alliance. The Golden Horde under Uzbek Khan maintained stable diplomatic and trade relations with the Byzantine Empire. Since the late 13th century, there were channels of communication between the Sarai court and Constantinople, and under Uzbek, these ties were strengthened. Byzantium was of interest to the Horde as a maritime partner and religious center, as well as a buffer state between the Latin West, Мусульманским Востоком. There is evidence of Byzantine embassies in Sarai, as well as active involvement of Greek merchants and Orthodox clergy in the territory of the Horde. It was a pragmatic alliance based on mutual benefit. The Horde needed trade and recognition, while Byzantium needed security for its northern borders and control over trade routes in the Black Sea. 30 years in power is an enormously long time for any era, especially for the Golden Horde, where Khans replaced each other faster than coins could be minted. Khan Uzbek ruled from 1312 to 1341 or 1342. This was, without exaggeration, the golden age of the Horde. In the last years of his life, Uzbek rarely led campaigns personally or judged disputes. Real power increasingly passed into the hands of his sons and closest emirs. He continued to keep the Horde in strict order, but more and more often. He died. Uzbek, like centralized authority. His authority was so great that even justice. Little is known about the death of Uzbek Khan. Sources report that he died a natural death around 1341 in Sarai, the capital he himself built and elevated. This is an almost unprecedented case. He died on the throne as a ruler who completed his political cycle without a bloody overthrow. Perhaps this is his most unexpected victory. His successor was his son Tinebek, and later another son, Janibek, under whom the Golden Horde would retain its power for a while, but would gradually begin to enter a period of crises. Historians are increasingly talking about the Eurasian phenomenon of the Golden Horde, a unique synthesis of nomadic and urban civilization, where Islam, shamanism, Christianity, and Tengrism clashed and interacted, where the steppe existed side by side with madrasas and horsemen with Bukhara merchants. And it was under Uzbek that this phenomenon took shape and grew in scope. It was during the era of Uzbek Khan that the foundations were laid for the emergence of a whole group of Turkic Mongol peoples. It's no coincidence that his name gave rise to the name of the Uzbeks, and the legal and administrative model of the Horde became the basis for the future ethnic identities of the Tatars, Kazakhs, Bashkirs, and Nogais. The story of Uzbek is not a legend about a great Khan, but a tale of how faith, strength, and a system can change the entire world. He didn't write treatises, didn't build pyramids, didn't seek immortality, but created a new form that would later be inherited by Rus, the steppe, and the Islamic East. This has been amazing history. If you're interested in real twists of history, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this episode. See you next time. There are still many names ahead, each with entire worlds behind them. Goodbye, everyone.